On a cold, rainy afternoon, a little girl with curly strawberry blonde hair and bright blue eyes clutched her lunch tightly, unaware that a single act of kindness would change not only one life, but two forever. In a world rushing by, her small heart held the power to open doors, heal old wounds, and remind everyone that compassion has no price, only courage and love.
Rain drizzled softly over Maplewood Elementary's playground, where laughter usually echoed like music. But today the sky hung low and gray, the wind carrying the scent of wet asphalt and distant lilacs. Inside the crowded cafeteria, children huddled over trays of pizza and juice boxes, their voices bouncing off the walls in cheerful chaos. At a small table near the window sat Emily Carter, a 7-year-old girl with strawberry blonde curls, big curious blue eyes, and a red lunchbox covered in stickers of stars and smiling suns. She wasn't loud like the other kids. She liked to eat slowly, watching raindrops race down the glass. Her sandwich, peanut butter and grape jelly, was neatly cut into 2 triangles, just the way her mother made it every morning before work. That morning had been like any other. Her mother, Sarah Carter, had rushed around the small kitchen, wearing her nurse's scrubs, whispering that she'd be home late again. Her father was overseas, serving in the Navy, so their house often felt too quiet. But Emily never complained. "Mommy's helping people," she always said with a smile, proud of her mother's kindness. After lunch, Emily had a habit of sitting outside the classroom for a few minutes, especially on rainy days. She liked to listen to the rain against the metal roof of the hallway awning. It made her feel safe, like the world was wrapping her in a blanket of sound. That was when she noticed him. Across the street from the school, near the bike racks, stood a tall, elderly black man wearing a soaked brown coat and a flat cap. His clothes looked old and worn, his shoes caked with mud. He held a paper cup in his hands, not begging, just standing quietly, his gaze fixed somewhere far away. He looked tired, the kind of tired that wasn't just about sleep. Children hurried past him, some glancing, others pretending not to see. A teacher closed her umbrella and ushered students inside. The man remained still, the rain beading on his coat, his expression unreadable. Emily tilted her head, curiosity blooming. She didn't know why, but something about him felt sad and familiar, like the old photographs of her grandpa who had passed away. Without really thinking, she opened her red lunchbox and looked at the half of her sandwich she hadn't eaten. Her small fingers hesitated, but her heart didn't. Holding the sandwich in a napkin, Emily stepped down the school stairs, her yellow rain boots splashing through puddles. The rain picked up, tiny silver lines falling between them. She stopped a few feet away from the man. "Excuse me, mister," she said softly. "Are you hungry?" The man blinked, startled. His eyes were deep brown, almost gold near the edges, and they softened as they met hers. His voice, rough yet warm, trembled when he spoke. "Well, I suppose I am. But that's your lunch, young lady." Emily smiled, her cheeks pink from the cold. "Mommy says we should always share what we have. It makes the world nicer." For a moment the man said nothing. Then slowly he knelt down so they were eye level. "Your mama raised you right," he whispered. She handed him the sandwich. He took it carefully, as if it were made of glass, and smiled, a small trembling smile that carried years of untold stories. The school bell rang, echoing down the street. Emily waved and ran back toward her classroom, boots splashing, hair bouncing. The man watched her go, standing in the rain with the sandwich in his hand. He hadn't felt warmth like that in years. And though Emily didn't know it yet, this simple act, this tiny moment beneath the gray sky, would change both their lives forever.
By the time Emily's last class ended, the rain had turned into a mist, soft and silver, hovering over the pavement like breath on glass. Parents arrived in cars, children rushed through puddles, and the schoolyard filled with the sound of closing umbrellas and laughter. Emily waited by the gate for her mother, swinging her red lunchbox by the handle. Her shoes were damp, and a strand of wet hair clung to her cheek. But she didn't care. She kept glancing across the street toward where she had seen the man earlier. He was still there, sitting now on the low brick wall near the old oak tree, coat dripping, paper cups set aside. The sandwich she'd given him was gone, but in his hand was a folded napkin, her napkin. He seemed to be holding it gently, like it was something precious. When Sarah Carter's silver sedan pulled up, she called out, "Emmy, hop in, sweetheart, before you catch a cold." Emily ran to the car, slid inside, and buckled up, still peering through the foggy window. "Mommy," she said after a moment, "there was a man outside school today. He looked really hungry, so I gave him my sandwich." Sarah's hands froze on the steering wheel for a second. "You did what?" "I gave him my sandwich. He was standing in the rain. He didn't ask for money or anything." Emily's tone was simple, like she'd said she'd shared crayons. Sarah exhaled slowly, part worry, part pride. "Sweetheart, that was kind of you, but you have to be careful, okay? Some people out there might not be safe." "I know," Emily murmured, looking down, "but he looked like he needed someone to care." Sarah reached over and tucked a curl behind her daughter's ear. "You've got such a big heart, Emmy, just like your dad." As they drove home, the rain returned, tapping softly on the windshield. But miles away, the man Emily had fed sat beneath the oak tree, watching the car disappear. His name was Thomas Reed. Once, a long time ago, that name meant something. It had been printed in business magazines, whispered in boardrooms. He'd been a man of immense wealth, known for philanthropy and quiet generosity. But years of betrayal and loss had stripped everything away. When his wife died and his company collapsed under false accusations, Thomas withdrew from the world. Now he lived in an old truck parked behind a derelict building on Pine Street. Nobody knew who he was anymore. And for the first time in years, he liked it that way. Yet, as he sat there, in the drizzle, holding the crumpled napkin from a child's hand, something inside him stirred. He hadn't expected kindness, not anymore, not after all he'd seen of greed and cruelty. That night he walked to a small diner on Main Street, where the waitress, a weary woman named Doris, served him a bowl of soup without judgment. "You look better than usual tonight, Thomas," she said with a grin. "Got good news?" He smiled faintly, looking at the napkin again. "Maybe I do." Back in her room, Emily knelt by her window, hands folded in prayer. "Please, God, make sure the man I met today has somewhere warm to sleep," she whispered before climbing into bed. And outside, under the vast, dark sky, a broken man with tired eyes whispered his own quiet prayer of thanks for a sandwich, a smile, and a little girl who still believed the world could be kind. The next morning, Maplewood awoke to golden sunlight spilling over the rooftops, melting the last of the rain. The world smelled of wet grass and new beginnings. Emily tugged on her blue cardigan, grabbed her red lunchbox, and ran to the door as her mother tied her hair into a ponytail. "Don't forget your umbrella, sweetheart," Sarah said, handing it over. "And remember, I'm working late again tonight. Mrs. Green from next door will walk you home." Emily nodded, her mind already somewhere else. As they drove toward school, she stared out the window, searching for the oak tree near the corner of the playground. He was there. Thomas Reed stood in the same spot as before, same brown coat, same hat, but this time the morning light softened the lines on his face. He looked almost peaceful, watching the children pour into the building. When Emily stepped out of the car,
Their eyes met briefly, and she smiled. Thomas lifted his hand in a small wave, almost shyly. Inside the school, Emily couldn't stop thinking about him. While other kids whispered about cartoons and weekend plans, her mind wandered to the man with the kind eyes and the soft voice. She wondered where he slept, if he had friends, if he was lonely. At recess, she asked her teacher, Mrs. Hill, "Do you think it's okay to be friends with someone older, like really older?" Mrs. Hill smiled. "Age doesn't decide friendship, Emily. Kindness does. But you must always be careful and make sure grown-ups know who your friends are." Emily nodded, taking the advice like a secret permission slip. That afternoon, instead of heading straight to Mrs. Green's car, she paused by the gate. Thomas was there again, sitting on the bench beneath the oak tree, feeding crumbs to a pigeon. The sight made her heart flutter with joy. She crossed the street carefully. "Hi again," she chirped. Thomas turned, his face lighting up in recognition. "Well, if it isn't the young lady with the red lunchbox." "I brought an apple today," she said proudly, holding it out. "Mommy says apples are good for people who think too much." Thomas chuckled, accepting it gently. "Then I'll need the biggest apple you've got." Emily sat beside him, swinging her legs. "Do you live around here?" He hesitated, then smiled softly. "You could say that. I like to walk a lot. The city has a way of teaching you things when you listen." "What does it teach you?" she asked. "That people are always rushing somewhere. But kindness waits. It finds you when you least expect it." Emily tilted her head, not understanding completely, but feeling that it was important. "Do you have anyone to talk to?" she asked after a moment. He glanced at her, surprised. "Not really. Most people pass by too fast to talk." "I can talk," she said quickly. "I like talking." Thomas's eyes glistened. "You remind me of someone I once knew, a little girl who believed the world could still be kind." "Did she give you her sandwich too?" she giggled. He laughed, a deep, rich laugh that felt like sunlight after a storm. "No," he said, "but she gave me something even better. Hope." The school bell rang, echoing down the block. Emily jumped up. "I have to go, but I'll see you tomorrow, okay?" Thomas nodded, smiling as he watched her run off with her red lunchbox swinging at her side. And for the first time in years, as he took a bite of the apple she'd given him, he felt something warm spreading through him. Not just the sweetness of the fruit, but the quiet miracle of being seen. The next morning, Emma rushed to school clutching her lunchbox a little tighter than usual. Her mother had packed her favorite, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches with apple slices and a small note that said, "Be kind, my little sunshine." She couldn't stop thinking about the man from yesterday, his gentle smile, his gratitude, the way his eyes seemed to hold stories. Something about him felt unfinished. She hoped he was okay, wherever he was. When lunch break came, she scanned the schoolyard and then, almost without realizing, walked toward the same bench outside the school gates. The cold morning had turned into a mild noon, sunlight slipping between the tall oak trees. And there he was again. Mr. Thomas sat on the bench with a worn coat and his same crooked smile. But this time he was holding a small paper bag. "I brought something for you," he said softly as Emma approached. "For me?" Emma blinked, surprised. He nodded and pulled out a tiny sketch pad. The drawings were simple but full of life. Children laughing, a playground, even one that looked like Emma sharing her lunch with him. The shading was careful, precise. "I used to draw," he said, almost apologetically. "Haven't done it in a while. But yesterday, you made me remember." She looked through the pages with awe. "You're really good," she said. "Why don't you draw more?" He chuckled, looking away. "Life gets busy. People forget what makes them happy." She thought for a moment and said with the kind of certainty only children possess, "Then you should remember again." That evening, after Emma went home, Mr. Thomas sat in his small temporary apartment staring at the drawings. He hadn't told her yet, but his visit to the school wasn't by accident. The school was one of several he had donated to over the years. He liked to visit anonymously to see how the money was spent and how the children lived. It helped him remember why he worked so hard. But something about Emma was different. Her kindness wasn't born from charity or duty. It was instinct, unfiltered, simple, and true. He thought about the days ahead. His foundation had just finalized a new community program aimed at helping struggling families with education and nutrition. And Emma's mother, as he'd quietly learned, was one of the school's cafeteria workers, working double shifts to keep her little girl fed and clothed. The next morning, the principal's office buzzed with an unexpected visit. Mr. Thomas, this time in a pressed suit and polished shoes, walked in with quiet confidence. His voice was calm but purposeful. "I'd like to discuss a scholarship program for one of your brightest little hearts." That same afternoon, Emma's mother was called in. When she entered the office, she froze, her eyes widening as she recognized the man sitting beside the principal. He stood, smiling gently. "Mrs. Miller, I believe we've met indirectly. Your daughter's kindness reminded me of what truly matters. I'd like to offer her a full scholarship and some support for your family as well." Mrs. Miller's eyes filled with tears. She tried to speak, but no words came out. She had no idea who this man really was. Mr. Thomas continued softly. "Sometimes the smallest kindness changes more than you can see." The world outside went on as usual, cars passing, children laughing. But in that quiet office, one act of innocence had rippled into something far greater. Emma didn't understand the details of scholarships or donations. All she knew was that the man with the warm eyes and the sketch pad had kept his promise. He remembered what made him happy. And in doing so, he changed a life.
News travels quietly in small towns, but kindness travels fast. Within a week, everyone at Willow Creek Elementary had heard that a mysterious donor had funded a new library wing, provided free lunches for struggling students, and announced a special scholarship for students who show exceptional compassion. Emma didn't think any of it had to do with her. She was too busy drawing flowers in her notebook and telling her mom about her day. But the teachers began whispering, and the principal kept smiling at her in the hallways. One afternoon, after class, the principal called her to the office. She hesitated, afraid she might have done something wrong, but when she walked in, she saw Mr. Thomas waiting, dressed again in his clean, elegant suit. He looked different now, important, but still kind. "Mr. Thomas," she gasped, "you look different." He laughed softly. "I suppose I do. Sometimes people wear different clothes for different parts of their lives, but I'm still me." He knelt down to her eye level. "Emma, do you remember when you shared your sandwich with me?" She nodded shyly. "You were hungry." "I was. But I was also searching for something I couldn't find in all my business meetings or big offices. And then a little girl reminded me that generosity doesn't depend on what's in your wallet, but what's in your heart." He handed her a small wrapped box. Inside was a brand new sketch pad, just like the one he'd shown her before. But on the first page, written in neat handwriting, were the words, "For Emma Miller, whose kindness builds worlds." Her eyes widened. "You made this for me?" He smiled. "You helped me remember who I was, Emma. And now I want to make sure you and others like you never forget who you can be." That evening, Emma's mother sat at the kitchen table reading a letter from Mr. Thomas's foundation. It stated that Emma had been chosen as the first Heart of Hope Scholar, with full tuition coverage for every stage of her education.
The program, the letter explained, was created in honor of a young girl who shared her lunch without hesitation. Tears fell onto the paper. She looked at her daughter, who was quietly drawing a picture of the two of them, holding hands under a big, shining sun. Days turned into weeks, and the new library at the school became a gathering place for stories. Children from all backgrounds came to read, create, and dream. A mural was painted above the entrance, an image of a small girl offering a sandwich to a man on a bench. Beneath it, a plaque read, "Kindness is never small." At the library's opening ceremony, the mayor stood beside Mr. Thomas and the school staff. Cameras flashed, but Mr. Thomas's gaze stayed on Emma, who was sitting in the front row wearing her favorite yellow dress. When it was his turn to speak, he didn't talk about money or success. Instead, he said, "The world doesn't change because of what we build or own. It changes because of who we are to one another." A little girl reminded me of that truth. She reminded me that humanity's wealth lies in its kindness. After the ceremony, as people clapped and reporters wrote down his words, Emma tugged on his sleeve. "So, you're a millionaire?" she asked, wide-eyed. He laughed. "Something like that." "Then why were you sitting outside our school looking sad?" He smiled softly. "Because even millionaires forget what happiness feels like, Emma. But a peanut butter sandwich reminded me." The little girl grinned. "Next time, I'll bring cookies too." He threw his head back and laughed, a sound full of warmth and freedom. The world, at that moment, seemed a little less lonely. Years passed. Seasons turned over Willow Creek like pages in a soft, familiar book. The trees that once shaded the old park bench grew taller, their roots thick and strong, just like Emma Miller. Emma had grown into a young woman with steady hands and kind eyes. She still carried her sketchpad everywhere, now filled with vivid paintings and portraits of people she'd met. Her talent bloomed alongside her compassion, and soon she was accepted into an art academy in the city, thanks to the Heart of Hope scholarship that had once seemed like a dream. The city was loud and restless. It wasn't like Willow Creek, where everyone smiled when you passed by. Here, people hurried, eyes fixed on glowing screens and clocks that ticked too fast. Emma tried to hold on to her small-town warmth, but life had a way of testing kindness. One rainy night, she was walking home from the bus stop, her sketchpad tucked under her arm, when she saw an old man struggling near a broken-down car. His coat was soaked, his hands trembling as he tried to fix a flat tire. Without a second thought, Emma ran over, holding her umbrella above him. "Sir, let me help you," she said. The man looked up startled, then smiled, a faint, weary smile that reminded her of someone. Together, they changed the tire in the downpour. When it was done, he thanked her, voice shaking. "You didn't have to stop," he said. "Most people wouldn't have." Emma laughed softly. "Someone once told me kindness doesn't depend on what you have. It depends on who you are." The man looked at her closely, then chuckled. Smart advice. He tipped his hat, started his car, and drove away into the rain. When Emma got home, she sat by her window, dripping wet, and stared out at the city lights. She thought of Mr. Thomas, the man who had once sat alone on a bench with nothing but quiet dignity and a broken heart. She wondered where he was now. Was he happy? Did he still carry that sketchpad she gave him? Months later, as she prepared for her first public art exhibition, Emma received a letter with no return address. The handwriting was neat, familiar. Her heart skipped. She opened it carefully. "Dear Emma," it began. "It seems your kindness has found its way into the world again. I've seen your name in the papers. Your art speaks the way you once did, with heart, without judgment. I am proud of you, always. I may not be there in person, but know this. You gave me the courage to live better. I hope, someday, our paths cross again, not as a man who was lost, but as a friend who found his way back. With gratitude, Mr. Thomas. Emma pressed her letter to her chest. Her eyes filled, but she smiled. You already did come back. You never really left. The night of her exhibition, the gallery buzzed with excitement. People in elegant clothes sipped champagne, pointing at her paintings, each one capturing moments of quiet humanity. But one canvas drew the most attention. A detailed portrait of a little girl offering a sandwich to a tired old man on a park bench. The piece was titled, "The Day the World Got Kinder." As the crowd admired it, an older gentleman entered quietly. His hair was silver now, his stride slower, but his eyes still carried that same warmth. He stopped in front of the painting, lips trembling slightly. When Emma turned and saw him, the room seemed to fall silent. "Mr. Thomas?" she breathed. He smiled softly. "You remembered." "Always." She ran to him and hugged him tightly, the years between them folding away like thin paper. He stepped back, looking at her with pride. "You've done something special, Emma. You've painted the world the way it should be." Tears welled in her eyes. "You taught me that." As the two stood beneath the glow of the gallery lights, the world outside continued rushing by. But in that small space, time slowed. It was just a girl who once shared her lunch and a man who had never stopped being grateful.
Spring had returned to the city, and the gallery where Emma's exhibition had opened now felt like a small sanctuary of light. But beyond the walls, the world was still fast, noisy, and often indifferent. Emma and Mr. Thomas had talked long into the evening about ways to ensure that the kindness she embodied could touch other children, just as it had once touched him. A few months later, they unveiled the Heart of Hope Foundation, a program designed to encourage children to perform small acts of kindness that could ripple through their schools and communities. Every donation, every initiative was tied to personal stories of generosity, with Emma and Thomas traveling together to meet students, teachers, and families. Their first visit took them back to Willow Creek Elementary. The little oak tree still stood tall near the gate, its leaves rustling in the gentle spring wind. Children ran toward them, recognizing Emma immediately, and stared in awe at the man in the elegant suit walking beside her. One girl, clutching a sandwich in her small hands, approached with a shy smile. I wanted to share this," she said. Thomas knelt down to her level, eyes soft. "You already know the most important thing," he whispered. "Kindness isn't measured by size, but by heart." Emma beamed, her curls bouncing. "That's right. You can change someone's day with something as small as a smile or a sandwich." Over the next months, the foundation grew. Stories of generosity poured in from cities across the country. Children helping classmates, parents volunteering, strangers paying forward small acts of kindness. Emma and Thomas's work inspired an entire generation to see that the smallest actions could have the most profound effects. One quiet evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in gold and pink streaks, Emma and Thomas sat on a park bench together. The air was filled with the scent of blooming flowers, distant laughter, and the faint rustle of the oak leaves. "You know," Thomas said, breaking the comfortable silence, "I never expected a peanut butter sandwich to change my life." Emma laughed, her blue eyes sparkling. "Neither did I,
But it did, didn't it? He nodded, looking at her with pride. It reminded me what I had forgotten, that true wealth isn't counted in money, but in hearts touched, lives changed, and hope restored. Emma looked down at her hands, still holding her sketch pad, and smiled softly. I think everyone can do that, if they just try. Exactly, and you taught me that lesson before anyone else even knew to ask. As the sun disappeared behind the horizon, the city glowed with the soft light of evening. In the quiet, the park bench seemed ordinary, but for Emma and Thomas, it held the echoes of a miracle, a tiny act of kindness on a rainy day that had grown into something immeasurable. The world was still vast, uncertain, and sometimes unfair. But for Emma, for Thomas, and for countless children and families touched by their foundation, it had also become a place of hope, warmth, and human connection. And all of it had begun with a red lunchbox, a little girl with a generous heart, and a man who had remembered what it meant to believe in kindness again. The end.